Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Film Haven Reviews. I'm your host Sawyer as always, and today we are continuing our bloody western theme. Now, I know that you might not have heard last week what the theme was because I forgot to introduce it. I was so busy with being episode 100 and all the stuff that entails with that I forgot to say, hey, this is a theme like we always do. And the theme was supposed to be bloody western. So I'm looking at, obviously, if you remember the Wild Bunch, I'm looking at movies that are kind of very violent Western movies, and kind of at the beginning of that whole time where Westerns are always been, shoot 'em ups in some ways. But obviously there's like a lot of different types of Westerns, and some of them are more low key, some of them are more action oriented. And so I wanted to look at the action oriented one, really take the Wild Bunch and say how precedential really is this movie. Like, was this film, was there movies before it that maybe push the envelope just as much? Is this like a misconception or something? And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do the movie that we're talking about today, which is Massacre Time, or in Italian, the original, it is Tempo di Massacaro. I totally butchered that. And then there's also a alternate English title of The Brute and the Beast. So interesting. I thought it was just Massacre Time, and then when I went on Tubi to watch it, it's on Tubi, by the way. A lot of spaghetti westerns are on Tubi, which is kind of fun. But yeah, they it said The Brute and the Beast, and I'm like, don't tell me this has another title. It seems pretty common with foreign films or movies, even American films that are released in international markets. They change the name, all that kind of fun stuff. Like we talked about a while back ago in the Walter Hill theme. What was the movie? Hard Hard Times. Hard Times was actually called The Street Fighter in Japan. So that's really interesting because it ended up kind of influencing the game Street Fighter, which is fun. But anyway, so yeah, we're gonna keep it a little tight here today. I said last time that we were gonna try to keep it at 30 minutes, and then 45 minutes again. So we're gonna try to fix that. No big preamble. We're just gonna get into the movie because honestly, there is some stuff to get into here, but this movie is not the Wild Bunch. I'll say that. So overview. Let's get into the overview. 6 out of 10. So that's honestly, 6 out of 10 is being a little bit kind. I think one of the reasons why I'm giving it a 6 out of 10 is because there are some really fun moments, and even the bad moments that we'll get into for sure is they're entertaining. So it's like, it's not that bad. It is bad though in some ways. You'll see what I'm saying, especially if you're watching this on video, which you can watch on Spotify or YouTube. Yeah, if you're watching on video, you'll be able to see some of these clips that I'm going to be putting up, and you can tell that this is there is quality issues here compared to, say, the Wild Bunch. But now that I've done a little bit more research on spaghetti westerns, we'll get into this. But it seems like spaghetti westerns have this kind of quality, especially a lot of them. I think technically Sergio Leone's movies are considered spaghetti westerns because what makes a spaghetti western is that it's an Italian director doing westerns, and this is at a time when that was very common. So yeah, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is a spaghetti western, but that's a different type of movie than your average spaghetti western, which is, I think, more like this film, because I've seen the average user rating on IMDb be anywhere from 5 to 6 something. This movie actually has a 6.5 on IMDb, which is now that I'm looking at the others, it's apparently one of the better ones. And it is very violent. We'll get into that, but it is definitely not as bloody as the Wild Bunch. The film is considered to be sadistic, or it's like kind of, because the director here is Lucia Fulci, and if you listen to my Giallo series, I did his movie The Psychic, which was a violent film for sure, and as a movie that very much is like, ooh, what kind of creative kills can we do? And this movie is like that in a way, I guess. Like, there is creative kills in the sense of like shootouts, like, oh, how many different ways can we shoot a guy? But it's not the Wild Bunches, and they're not using blood squibs. We'll get more into that when we talk about the climax of the scene, because I think that's really what we're a good vehicle for us to talk about everything else in the movie, like the technical aspects and stuff like that. But yeah, while this movie is really violent, it's not as bloody, it's not as visceral as the Wild Bunch is. There are some things in the character Junior, who we'll definitely get into, he's the sadistic part of it, I guess. So people are trying to connect Lucia Fulci, who's a horror director and a giallo film director, him doing a western and being like, "Oh, this would inform his later movies." And I'm like, maybe. I don't know. It has hints of horror, but not really. There's like one scene really I can think of. But anyway, yeah. So like I said, the climax is really the best part. It reminds me a little bit of Captain America: Brave New World, which I haven't seen yet, but I've been reading a lot of reviews, and it seems like that whole movie is a build up for a 3-minute scene at the end of the movie where Harrison Ford's Red Hulk fights Captain America, and like that's like what the whole movie is just building up to a 3-minute scene. This movie also feels like it's building up to like a 5-minute scene, which is the big climax, which is a fun little climax. Other than one scene towards the end as well, where there's a big whip fight, and that's fun because if anyone knows me, they know that I think whips are really funny and also kind of cool. I mean, if I knew how to use a whip, I think that would be awesome. I mean, you could just like whip things. I don't know. It's a weird like extension that people, it's kind of like lassos too, when people know how to like wrap people around with lassos. That seems like a weird superpower. So whips are, I've always been kind of fun for me, and in like video games, with weapons, I always love a good whip. So there's a great whip scene in this movie that we'll talk about later. The acting is atrocious, absolutely bad. We'll put in some scenes in here where you can kind of see the deliveries really bad. And of course there's this like ADR issue. This is a classic Italian thing, especially with giallos, but also apparently with spaghetti westerns, where you have these Italian directors who are doing movies that are spoken in English, sometimes a lot of times with English actors, and then they obviously record this audio in studio afterwards or something, and then overlay it, and they don't always match up. It's like you're watching English dubs with an English movie instead of like a foreign like language film, and it's just, so it adds to the hokiness, it adds to the humor of it being really bad. So I guess in that way it's fine, but it's rough. The picture quality is also very low. The picture quality is just, it's like 380p at a good moment. And it seems like Tubi just ripped this off of like one of the last like copies of a film reel that this movie was on. Like they digitized it and it was like the only one. Like I was talking to my parents about this movie, and I was like, I always love a good story where they're like, "Oh, this movie was recovered from a burning building. It's the only copy we have left." A lot of silent films are like that. And then this movie, I was like, well, I mean, if it would have like been left in the fire, like that's all right. It's not a big loss to cinematic history. To be fair, it is entertaining at points, but it's definitely a throwaway film at the end of the day. The set design also seems really cheap. This is obviously a very B movie vibes here. So the kind of suspended disbelief, the immersion factor is not always there because, well, one, the movie's just so freaking silly, but also some of the buildings and stuff. It is obviously like a Western studio set, and it looks like some of the things have been like painted on or plastered on. It just doesn't look very put together well. And yeah, so in the overview, as you could tell, there's a lot of things to complain about, but some of those things are entertaining, and I guess that's why the movie's getting a 6 out of 10, because I had a good time watching it. And some of the action's pretty solid. I mean, you don't need blood for the action to be cool, and it makes me interested in seeing some other spaghetti westerns because, yeah, it's kind of fun. It's like with a lot of action stuff. You're not always there for the story. You're there to see what kind of cool things you can do with action. Same with horror. What kind of cool kills can we do? So sometimes a movie with a pretty lame plot can end up being pretty cool if you have some cool kills, like a horror movie, like in a slasher. So yeah, moving on. Speaking of the story, let's get into the narrative. I'm going to do another. I think I liked last time with the Wild Bunch, where I kind of have like a pre-prepared thing that I can write out so that it makes it easier to overlay the editing stuff so I don't miss anything. So you can kind of see on the screen if you're watching what the movie is about, and it helps you orient yourself when I talk about stuff later on. So the movie starts off with a pretty classic scene of like kind of man's deadliest game, or if you've seen that movie, The Hunt, or like there's so many different versions of this where they're basically doing like a fox hunt. but it's with a human. They got a human in a cage, and it's introducing our really weird antagonist, our villain here, Junior. And he's always, we'll talk about him later. I want to save like a whole section for him, but he's always got his head tilted. It's just so strange. And he's got this weird look on his face. That's the sadistic stuff, because whenever like the guy eventually is getting like eaten by dogs in a river, and him and his buddies are just like staring and obviously getting some kind of pleasure out of it, which is pretty bad and pretty weird. But anyway, the movie is actually about a guy named Tom, and he's a prospector who gets word from an anonymous letter that he needs to get back to his hometown. He doesn't know why. There's some mystery around it. Tom was sent away when his father died, and his brother Jeff got the rights to his ranch. So he's kind of estranged. He's been out. He's prospecting to make his own fortune, because he was sent away, and they don't really explain why that he was sent away and his brother inherited everything. When Tom gets back home to, it's like Laramie, I think is the name of the town, he finds that Jeff is an alcoholic and has sold the ranch to a local businessman, Scott, who now seems to own the whole town. And you'll see there's a moment where he kind of notices that like the general store is the Scott store or whatever, and the Scott Bank, and he just, is one of those guys, a local magnate. Now, Scott's son Junior, who we just talked about, is insane, and he holds his head weird on top of being very good with the whip, and we'll get into that. Now, Tom and Jeff must band together to take on Junior before he kills everyone in town, out of pure unhinged insanity and sadism. So that's really that's the movie. It's just Tom running around the town trying to figure out why Scott and really Junior, why they're doing atrocities in the town. They're owning the town with an iron fist, and then he's trying to fight back, but they never quite kill him. They never they have opportunities to shoot him, Tom, the main character, but they never do it. And so there's a mystery there that he's trying to unfold at the same time, and as well as figuring out what happened with my brother Jeff. He's like an alcoholic now, and he seems very narcissistic, not narcissistic, nihilistic. Just doesn't care about anything, and he's very self-oriented, and there's always this weird stuff about being his brother, and I don't know, it just seems weird. I don't think anyone's gonna watch this movie, probably. And if you are, turn this episode off, because I'm about to do a big spoiler. But it's really old hat, honestly. Turns out that Scott, the local magnate, the rich man, is somehow Tom's father, and that Jeff is actually his half brother, which explains why Jeff got the inheritance and Tom was sent off. But it doesn't seem like Tom even knew who Scott was before he came back to town after being gone for like 10 years. So it's like, you didn't even know who this guy was. Like, it's not like he was some local entity when you were growing up. Like, why would he come back? Like, I don't know. There's a lot of plot holes. But anyway, that's pretty much the story. Their Junior is getting worse and worse, and Scott, the father of both Tom and Junior, is trying to get closer by the end with Tom, that he was the one that sent the letter, so he's bringing him there. It really doesn't it makes some sense, but they didn't do it well. I guess the main thing you need to know is that Junior is a bad guy, and Tom and Jeff have to take him down by the end. Simple. That's really what this movie is about, and they try to add some flair to it to try to increase, I guess, some of the story narrative quality, but it doesn't necessarily work. Let's talk about Junior, because he is one of the things that makes this movie kind of bad in some ways, because it's just so like, how is this a character? But also makes it entertaining. I mean, he's one of the reasons why this movie is worth watching, is because he's so weird. So weird. Like I said, he's always tilting his head and looking and not really saying much. He's always got his eyes like squinting a little bit. Very strange. And there's this whole weird scene with he's playing the piano in the parlor, and his dad comes in and he's like, "You taught me this song, Daddy." And he like literally talks like that, and he's like, "Love me, Daddy. Be close to me. Remember when we were one, Daddy?"
You love me, Daddy.
I want to talk to you.
What is it, Daddy? Are we still one? Remember, you and me. Not you, not me, both of us.
And it's like, what? Who wrote this scene? This is so weird. I'll play you some of the audio because it is strange. The weird thing is, though, is that he just ends up turning into a normal guy by the end of in the climax. The weirdness of him goes away, and he's just like that classic normal bad guy just running away from the protagonist, killing him, and he's sending all his henchmen out, and he's like, "You go, and I'll stay back." And that's he kind of devolves a little bit at the end, but he is a big part of the movie and one of the reasons why it is actually entertaining to watch. Let's get into some of the acting lines. I told you I was going to overlay some of those acting lines, so I just wanted to talk about some of them. There's one where at the beginning where Tom gets the letter, and it's just this guy from town, and the guy just says, "I'm never going back to that town again."
Then you and I can go back to town.
I'm never going back to that town.
And he runs off, and the way the line is delivered is just so bad. I was just like, and it was the beginning of the movie, so I was like, okay, this is what we're in for. And then there's another one where Jeff, he sees Tom sees Jeff, his brother, for the first time in like 10 years, and he's like obviously drunk, and he turns around and he's just like, "And who are you?"
Who are you, anyhow?
And just the way he says that is bad. It's just bad. Bad acting. I know he's supposed to be drunk. I get it. And they're like, there's a little bit of like overacting melodrama. If you listen to the dubs of like a lot of anime movies or something, like I talked about in the Paprika episode where I watched it in theaters and they had English dubs, it has the same kind of hokey vibe where the acting is just a little too much. But then like the weird pauses for effect is weird too. So like when Tom reveals, or Jeff reveals to Tom that Scott killed their father, or just Jeff's father, Tom says a line like,
No one ever told me that our father had been killed by Scott.
it's just the way he said it. I just shook my head and hung my head low, and I was just like, oh my God. Here we go. So yeah, the acting was absolutely atrocious. I wanted to kind of put some of that stuff out. The good thing, though, we can get into the good things right before the climax, and it kind of leads into the climax, is the action is pretty good. The action it's not very bloody, but it is good. There's this, it kind of starts, there's a bar fight scene, I guess, which has some action in it. It's not amazing, but it is kind of fun. Jeff gets beat up by a bunch of guys, and then Tom comes in to save him and starts beating up the guys, and he's taking on 3 guys at once. And so it's a classic bar fight scene. Pretty okay choreography, honestly. So I was like, okay, this movie might have some good action when I saw that scene. And then towards the second half, they actually start to have some pretty good gunfights. And there's one where Jeff comes back on these guys who are guarding the area around Scott's ranch, and he side saddles the horse and gets real low, and on the side he shoots 6 guys with 6 bullets, kind of thing. And that was also really weird to me, though, because Jeff like was this drunk who just seems like totally inept and incapable, and then all of a sudden he becomes this like master, crack shot. Like he's a master of arms, and you'll see that. We'll as you overlay some of these scenes, especially in the climax, you'll see he's just like amazing. There's even a scene where he throws a whiskey bottle away and just shoots it out of the sky behind him. Like he's obviously, this is like otherworldly. This guy is a sharpshooter. So it's like that doesn't make any sense, but hey, I'm okay with it because at least he's cool. Like I would rather him be good and then bad, because before he just spends all this time whining and being drunk. And then there's a scene where they're in an abandoned building, and there's kind of like a bunch of guys coming at them, and they kind of have to like not last stand, but they're trapped, so they have to fight their way out, shooting through windows and stuff. That's pretty cool. Real quickly before I get into the climax, though, I did want to talk about one scene. Tom eventually makes it to the Scott Ranch, and they're having this big kind of like party, this outdoor get together. It's very fancy. Everyone's in white, and there's servers and all that kind of stuff. And he kind of crashes the party to be like, "Hey, Scott, what's going on with this in town?" And Scott's kind of like, "Oh, I'll talk to you later. Don't worry about it." And then Junior is getting like jealous, obviously, I guess, in some ways. And he starts they start having this fight, and Junior starts whipping him, and then he gives him a whip, and they have this like whip fight. But obviously Junior is way better at whips than Tom is, and so he's winning. And just the idea of them having a whip fight is like a whip duel. I don't know if I've ever seen that in a movie, and I'm really happy that I did now. So this is the reason why I think that they should have taken this last recording of this movie, the last film reel, out of the burning building because we would never see the whip scene again. And that's, now it's in the internet forever. So that's great. But anyway, so you see Junior starts whipping him real bad, and it's just a drawn out scene of being whipped, and it gets really bad by the end where he's just whipping him with reckless abandon, and everyone's kind of like, oh. And then there's also some practical stuff here where Tom will get whipped, and you'll see a slash go, a scar go against his face, and that was kind of cool. Obviously they have to do like a special cut or something like that to make that effect work. Thought that was fun. Not bloody though, but afterwards he does have like a bloody face when he comes home after he gets beat by the whip. But anyway, I wanted to talk about the whip scene because that is just, how could you not, right? It's also on one of the posters. If you see, I didn't even realize until afterwards. But yeah, you can see Junior there in the white suit whipping Tom. But anyway, so the climax. Let's get into the climax because that's what we're really here. That's what we're all here for, because that's all the movie really is the last 5 minutes. Everything else is kind of build up for this. So eventually Junior kills Scott, the dad of both Junior and Tom. So now Tom's mad. And so Tom and Jeff join together to do like an assault on Scott's ranch, the ranch complex, the mansion and the surrounding barns and stuff. And they're, of course, just crawling with guys and henchmen. And so they're infiltrating, and Tom is coming in from the side, and Jeff's like, you got to use the rifle and the pistol, if you know what I mean. And I'm like, what do you mean? And it really means is do a jump shot where you shoot the rifle and the pistol at the same time and kill two guys, because that makes sense. Definitely accuracy does not matter when you're this good at shooting guns. And so that lays the foundation for how ridiculous this scene's going to be. And it is ridiculous, but fun ridiculous. There's lots of cool action. There's lots of Jeff is just really cool, like good at shooting, and so cool, like over the shoulder shots. I liked that too. There were some shots where it's almost like POV, like where you're from like first person perspective or third person over the shoulder shooting guys. Then there's like some great like multiple guys shooting, kind of like I said with the side saddle thing where he's like bang 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 bang. Jeff on the top of the roof did a couple of those, and then my favorite though is there's lots of tumbles, like tumble shots, people rolling and flipping and then shooting, and some of it looks a little hokey. There's one where a guy gets shot who's in midair, like he's jumping at Tom, and Tom shoots him, and it very obviously is them reversing the reel. Like they just edited it to where he reversed in the sky, so it looked like he was being blown back, but really he was jumping forward. Reminds me a lot of like low level, like B movie Bollywood action films. There's a lot of clips of those where they just do the most ridiculous things. And then one of my favorites though is there's a scene where Tom's on the back of a buggy, like a horse buggy, and he's shooting the guys, and then he pushes the buggy down the ramp. He rides the ramp, it hits the horse cart, and then he does like a flip over the horse cart, which is obviously on a trampoline, like very obviously a trampoline flip, and then floats behind the guys, and then bang, 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 shoots all three of them or four of them in one go. And it's dumb, but it is kind of a cool scene. So I'm fine with it. This is a good place too to talk about some of the practical effects, right? So there's no blood squibs, like I mentioned before. So if we're trying to compare this to Wild Bunch, trying to see where's the precedence here, where like is this movie pushing the envelope in any way? I don't know if I can say that for sure yet because I haven't seen that many spaghetti westerns. But if we're comparing it just to the Wild Bunch, which was made 3 years later, there's, like I said, no squibs. There is like even a scene where the guy gets shot in the head, and you see like obviously they just cut the film and then put some makeup on his head to look like he had a head wound. But it looks nothing like, say, for example, last week when I was talking about how a guy got shot through the back of the head, and you literally see like a bullet hole come out of the back of his head. That is much different than what we're seeing here. And of course, the budget's different as well. But if we're looking at like when you type in bloody westerns, this movie is like one of the top ones. And I'm like, why? There is blood in the movie, yes. There's a scene where in this climactic scene where one of the henchmen, like the main henchman, gets killed by Junior, and they string him up like almost like crucify him, and he's very bloody, and that's what I mean by like, there's like hints of horror, like that's kind of horror-esque, I guess. It's horrifying in real life if you saw that. Um, but yeah, you see a couple of shots where guys are dead on the ground and they have some bullet wounds on them and they're kind of bloody, but it's just not anywhere the same as the Wild Bunch. So the climax, if there was going to be blood in there, it would be there, and it's just not. There's even a shot where a guy gets shot like point blank like 3 or 4 times, and you just don't see anything. He just kind of falls over. So if that gives you any indication. But like I said, I mean, for action purposes, you don't necessarily need that. I think it helps with the realism of it. But in this movie, that is not like the Wild Bunch was trying to make a statement with its realism. It was definitely like we got the Vietnam in the background. We talked about that last week. All this kind of stuff going on. This movie didn't need that because it wasn't trying to say anything. This movie was obviously made to entertain and to sell tickets at a low, production cost. So it makes sense. I think that the spaghetti Western, it seems like this types of action is very common in spaghetti Westerns. That's what most of the movie is about, is like movies are about in spaghetti Westerns. This genre is about whatever exposition and then some cool shootouts throughout the movie. And that is very much this film put in a nutshell. Oh, and there is some blood at the end when Junior finally dies. They have this whole scene. It's very classic, of course. They're on this cool like kind of bridge between two buildings at the ranch complex, and Tom gets knocked down off the bridge and he's hanging, and there's the classic stomp on his fingers, and then Junior gets flipped over. Tom grabs his leg and flips him over, and he falls to his death. And then you see when he's dead, like the blood on his mouth, and then it's pooling. So there's a good amount of blood in that scene, I guess. But I mean, blood has existed in movies, I guess is my point. The Wild Bunch, no one had seen that much carnage, like that much like blood packed squibs, like blood coming off of people's bodies as they're being shot. Like that's just like totally different than what we're even seeing in this movie. So I think it's interesting to I'm glad I went back and saw this, because this movie is supposed to be so not ahead of its time, but indicative of future times with its violence. And I think that it didn't really hold up in that regard in some ways. I think that the acting was bad. I think the picture quality was terrible. The production design wasn't very good, but there was just enough quirks in the movie, and the action was just good enough and unique enough for me to say, yeah, 6 out of 10. This was above average in some ways because it was fun to watch. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's entertainment value. Like, is this one of those so bad it's good kind of movies? A little bit. There's a little bit of that. And then there are some legitimately good things, like some of the action choreography, even if some of them, like jumping over a trampoline, obviously was a little hokey. I think if we're moving on with the theme and kind of looking at this this bloody Western idea, I think what I've come to is it seems like spaghetti Westerns led into movies like The Wild Bunch because they are very violent, even if they aren't bloody. So while Wild Bunch didn't happen in a vacuum, is what I'm saying. I think that spaghetti Westerns, if they are all supposed to be as violent as this one, as far as like the amount of people that are dying, and by people that are dying in shootouts, how action oriented the film is, it definitely informed The Wild Bunch. So while The Wild Bunch may have taken it to new levels, this maybe it wouldn't have happened if these spaghetti Westerns hadn't come out beforehand. So I think that there is maybe some precedence in Massacre Time. And so what I think I'm going to do, so with my themes, the third movie I was going to do the Outlaw Josie Wales, which I do want to get to eventually, but I could always fold that into like a Clint Eastwood theme. And I don't want this one to be specifically spaghetti Western because I didn't even know really what all that genre entailed until just recently, but it has got me curious. And so I'm looking at some other movies that are also violent from the 60s, and a lot of them it tend to be spaghetti Westerns. And so I think I'm going to try to look and do another spaghetti Western. Just, I want to keep it within this time frame because Outlaw Josie Wales is like 76, I think. So we're like almost a decade away. We are a decade away from this movie. I want to stick to this time frame because I want to see like what people were doing at the time. I don't know, educate myself and educate you guys on what this whole genre was doing and where violence in Westerns kind of percolated and grew into what they are today. Because I mean, you look at a show right now that just came out, American Primeval. From what I've heard, I haven't seen it yet, but from what I heard, it's one of the most brutal westerns ever. And then, of course, you have the HBO show Deadwood. I mean, these are things that are obviously taking notes out of the realism that was created in the Wild Bunch, but the ultra violence that was maybe pioneered here in the spaghetti western. So I think we're going to do another spaghetti western for next week. Not sure what it is yet, so it'll be a surprise for you and me. Well, I hope you guys like this episode. Looks like we're a little bit lower, on time, not as high, not 45 minutes. There was no good articles or anything on this movie. I don't think it was too much to get into. Just a lot of action stuff to talk about, and of course, the whip scene. So anyway, hope you guys have a great week this week, and I will see you next Friday.